All right, we appreciate everybody being here tonight. We're certainly thankful for everyone that's come out. And everybody got a new paper on it, I'm assuming, except for Heather. She's sent it away, so if one of y'all will, pass it back to her. Thank you. We have been looking, of course, at baptism. We went through a lot on that, and I feel like we've pretty well covered it. I don't want to presume anything. Are there any questions that y'all have looking back at baptism? I mean, we've covered a whole lot on it, but there may be some specific question or some specific verse that you are concerned about that you want to look at before we move on. Okay, I'm going to take that as a no, there's not. So tonight, we're going to pick up on the Lord's Supper. Now, the paper that I have given you starts out with some general texts, is what I call them. But these are the places in the Scriptures that the Lord's Supper is elaborated or described. And, of course, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then in 1 Corinthians. I think, way back at the beginning, first night or two, we touched even on some of these in 1 Corinthians, even though we didn't get into the part we will get into. But I put those out there for you so that before we get back here, you might want to read over some of those or look at them if you haven't already, and just start looking at it. So we're going to start out tonight in the 26th chapter of the book of Matthew. If you'd like to read with us, I want to read some here in Matthew, and then we're going to move on from that. And this is primarily just to introduce the idea of the Lord's Supper. And Matthew 26 and 17 is where we're going to start. It says, a little frog. It said, now the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying unto him, where wilt thou that we prepare for thee to eat the Passover? And he said, go into the city to such a man, and say unto him, the master saith, my time is at hand, I will keep thee Passover at thy house with my disciples. And the disciples did as Jesus had appointed them. And they made ready the Passover. And when even was come, he sat down with the 12. And as they did eat, he said, verily I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. And they were exceeding sorrowful, and began every one of them to say unto him, Lord, is it I? And he answered and said, he that dippeth his hand with me in the dish, the same shall betray me. For the Son of Man goeth as it is written of him, but woe unto that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It had been good for that man if he had not been born. Then Judas, which betrayed him, answered and said, Master, is it I? He said unto him, thou hast said. And as they were eating, now, just real quickly, what we have read thus far, before I get into verse 26, is the preparation and the service of not the Lord's Supper, but the Passover. Okay? So the Passover was the feast, and we're going to look at that a little bit more in a minute. But now, during the Passover, or as they were eating, or at the conclusion of the Passover, as they were still there, the Lord institutes the Lord's Supper. I'm good. I've got one in. It's just, in verse 26, it says, and as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and brake it and gave it to the disciples and said, take, eat. This is my body. So that is the first portion of the Lord's Supper, which is the body. It is, or the bread, which is representative of the body of Christ. That was the first thing that he served them. The next thing, he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, "Drink ye all of it." Now, I'm going to just say this here because that's a question sometimes that comes up. I don't think it means empty the cup. It means all of you take a drink. Okay? So, "For this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. But I say unto you, I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung an hymn, they went out into the Mount of Olives. And I'm going to stop reading right there. I don't know where I went a little further than what I even had copied down here. But again, this is the institution of the Passover in the book of Matthew. Before we get done, we'll look at Mark, Luke, and John. And we will look over in 1 Corinthians, and then there's a few other verses that we will look at in the New Testament in connection with it. But as y'all can tell, the Lord's Supper was instituted at the end of the Passover. I don't think that was by happenstance. I don't think that was a chance that took place. Y'all pardon me, I don't know who in the world. But with my dad, I never know, so I might ought to check it. Okay. And I'm going to turn it off. How about that? That's the way to handle that. I think I got it turned off. It may come back on in a minute. So, apologize about that. So what I want to do tonight, having introduced that thought, is I want us to go back and I want us to start looking at the Passover. Because I think these two things, there are pictures in the Passover that do come forward to the Lord's Supper. And I think there's a lot of similarities, I'm going to put it that way. And I want us to go back and I want us to look at the Passover. I want us to consider it and be comfortable with it as we move forward. And then we'll come back to the Lord's Supper. So, sound like a deal to everybody? So let's go to the book of Exodus, chapter 12. Are there any questions, by the way, about what we read in Matthew? I mean, I know it's not really, because I've got a whole lot of points we're going to get to in Matthew, but anything in particular, anything that caught your attention when we was reading through? All right, Exodus chapter 12. Now, in the book of Exodus, of course, I would think the majority of y'all are well familiar with the idea of what's going on in Exodus. Israel has been brought into bondage in Egypt. They've been there for 400 some odd years. I think 430 by the time they came out, which is fixing to happen. God sent Moses to deliver them out of the bondage. He gave him Aaron to be a mouthpiece to him. And they came back and he went in before Pharaoh and said, "Thus saith the Lord God, let my people go." Okay? Y'all are familiar with that. And of course, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. At different places you find where the Bible says that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. Other places you find where it says God hardened his heart. Long story short, I think that can be explained. And I think it is, go ahead and cut that off. I think it is explained simply by the fact that we're getting to where we're at in the 12th chapter. Part of the promise that God made to Abraham years ago, he said, "Know of an assurity that thy seed shall be strangers in a land, and they shall afflict them for 400 years. Afterwards they will come out with the wealth of that land." Okay? I think there's things that have to happen for them to come out with the wealth of the land. And that, you know, if he'd have just went down there and said, "Thus saith the Lord God, let my people go," he'd say, "Well, okay," and let them go. Well, they're just going to go out with what they have. That's not what God had promised. Okay? I think God knew what was going on, and I believe what you see here is the providential hand of God. And I would even go so far as to say I do believe this is part of the predeterminate counsel of God in bringing about Israel as a nation. Okay? Israel as a nation has to come into existence because it is through Israel that Christ will come. And Christ is the one that God had foreordained. So, looking at that and considering that, we have to have certain things happening. Okay? So, we're in the 12th chapter. We've already went through 9 separate plagues. I'm not going to try to name all of them, but like the water, the blood, the lice, the frogs, the murrain of beasts, the hail, darkness, boils, lice, and there was 9 others. They were bad, okay, and they increasingly got worse, okay, and literally Egypt, being the most powerful nation in the world, one by one in these plagues is being brought absolutely to destitution. Mm-hmm. And the truth be told, they've still not really recovered. Mm-hmm. If you look, they're like a lot of the other Middle Eastern countries. At this time, they had wealth beyond anything you could possibly imagine. They lost it all. Okay? And I believe that is the judgment of God. Okay? But we get to chapter 12, and we're going to start reading in verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Pausing right there, I want to look at that for just a second. I think that at the very outset explains how serious what is fixing to happen is. Okay? It is from this point, this thing that is fixing to take place, that you start counting your calendar year. Mm-hmm. This is the beginning for you, in other words. Okay? That puts a lot of emphasis on what's fixing to happen. He says, Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month, they shall take to them every man a lamb according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for a house. If the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of souls. Every man according to his eating shall make your count for the lamb. Okay? I've already explained to y'all that I believe there's symbolism in this that leads forward to the Lord's Supper. Okay? I am, in the days that we live, completely satisfied and believe the best possible option for our churches is closed communion without any other church being involved. I think it should be that church and that church alone. Okay? Now, obviously, I personally have no problem with there being exceptions made for pastors, situations like that. Okay? But if there is an argument to be made, for instance, one church coming in and their members being able to take the Lord's Supper at another church, I believe that verse might be it. Okay? If it's too small, then the house that is next to them, they're to join together. Okay? That's not a hard, fast rule, because it could also say that if you're too small to take care of your business, you might ought to join up with somebody else too. Okay? But there is at least a consideration that can be made by that verse that would justify two churches coming together. Now, again, my personal opinion, and that, by the way, is the way that after I got saved, things were done in the majority of our churches. Okay? And it's been in the last several years that we have got away from that and we have started closing. And I think there is some wisdom in that. Okay? Because I believe it is the responsibility of the local church to keep their Lord's Supper right. And with all the things that have entered in at different churches, different places, things that we know about, not to mention the things we don't know about, How do we know who we're eating with? Is what the question becomes. So to me, there's a really good argument to close it, and I'm in favor of that, just to be honest. But at the same time, if a church is still open, I'm not going to fall out with them. I have pastored churches that are open. I have pastored churches that are strictly closed. Okay? For the sake of expediency and protecting the ordinance, closed is going to be better. But I don't have a problem with it being a church that you're in fellowship with, if you're sure of it, if you're comfortable with it, But anyway, that's just a side note, because that's really not where we're at tonight. So then let's pick up at verse 5. It says, "Your lamb shall be without blemish. A male of the first year, you shall take it out from among the sheep or from the goats." Okay? So when we're talking about a lamb, it's to be a yearling male lamb. It can be either a sheep or a goat. And it is to be without spot or without blemish. It is to be the very, very best that you have. Okay? And I think all of y'all can see the picture there, that being a representation of Christ. Okay? He was without spot, without blemish. He was perfect. Okay? So you see that picture, and you find that throughout a lot of the laws and the things that are given later on to Israel as a nation, where that requirement is setting there. They are to be the best that you've got. So here we have this situation where he says, choose this one out. And you shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. They shall take of the blood and strike it on the two side posts and on the upper doorpost of the houses wherein they shall eat. So just briefly touching on this, what he's saying is they're to kill it. Later on we find that they're to catch the blood in a basin, or there is a basin with the blood, which means they caught it in the blood. It doesn't exactly say that in these scriptures, but that's the implication. They're to take, and we find this later as well, they take hyssop and they dip it into the blood. They're to strike the lintel and the side post, which is the top, and both sides. Okay? And they're to put that blood on there with the hyssop. Now, in doing that, it completely covers the doorway, right? And let me go on and read a little bit more. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. So he specifies exactly how they're to cook it. He says in verse 9, even more, he said, "Eat not of it raw, nor sodden it all with water, but roast with fire his head, with his legs, and with the purtenance thereof." Okay, all of the animal was meant to be consumed. So you count up how many of you there are, how many of y'all, how much will it take for y'all to eat this whole thing? You're supposed to eat it all. It is supposed to be completely consumed. And he tells them exactly how to cook it, what to eat with it, and he said, "You shall let nothing of it remain until the morning, and that which remaineth of it until the morning you shall burn with fire." Okay? David, you got a question or comment?
Well, I've got a question.
Okay.
They put it up for 4 days.
Yes.
Is that simply to keep it away from unclean animals, to have it separated, or is there a purpose of the 4 days?
Well, I would think it would be twofold. You're still talking about a yearling, and I don't know how or when exactly they would have weaned them. So I think you would get them away from the mother, and you would also keep them from unclean. You're controlling what goes into it at that point. And so the general idea is it is separated from everything else.
So no obvious things, and I don't know of any, I'm just asking.
No,
obvious connection with 4 days.
No, not that I know of. Not that I know of.
This is a yearling. Is it this big, or is it?
No, I've not raised any, so I couldn't say. I would say it's not a full grown, but it's getting pretty close, right?
I would go with this big. And the reason I say that is I read an article the other day, Junior, about cows. And you and I had talked about the size from when we were little to now. Well, they say back in this time that a cow wasn't much bigger than a calf, what we would consider, you know.
Right.
If it stood this tall, you've got a big old cow. So I would think sheep and goats would be
Even smaller.
even smaller.
Back when I was a kid, a cow, a big, good cow weighed 800 pounds. 800 to 900 pounds, a big cow back in those days. And now, I mean, I got cows.
Now you don't
I
even
had
start
cows
thinking
weigh-
about selling them until 1,000.
Well, right,
Yeah.
now, you know, I had cows weighing 14, 1,500 pounds. You don't really want that big egg too much. About 11, 1,200 before you want that.
This is smaller than full grown.
I would think, and I would think, and I think Junior could verify this even with cattle. When a heifer's a yearling is when you breed it, correct?
I breed them at a year old.
At a year old,
Yeah.
most people do, but they continue to grow past that.
Oh, yeah.
Because a
Cows are
heifer's
full grown, they're about 5 years old.
probably, would you say 3/4 size at a year?
Well, I've got some that's 2-year-old, it's calving right now, and they're gonna weigh about 1,000 pounds.
Okay. And they'll still put weight on after that.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so you could be maybe even less than 3/4 of a full-grown size, I guess.
They kill them over at the Mennonites all the time, especially in the month of November. I think that is Islam people over
Yeah.
there by the groves.
Yeah.
And when they kill them as yearlings, and I'm gonna say they weigh 75, 80 pounds, maybe 100
On the hoof.
on the hoof.
So you take off.
That's a goat or a calf or sheep.
Well, they raise sheep over there. They raise sheep over there. I don't know if I've ever seen any goats over there. They raise sheep.
Yeah. So you take out the entrails, the things like that, the skin, take away the weight of the bones, you're back around probably 40, 50 pounds.
They'll pack them
Meat.
away in a cooler. They'll
Yeah.
put them in a big cooler, once they work them up.
And like David was saying, probably 2,000 years ago, they were smaller than that. So it could be even less than
They
that.
have evolved, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's selective breeding. You
Right.
take the best,
Consumption.
you put them together, the quality of feed that they're getting, a whole lot of things would go into the size of the animal now as opposed to back then. So, okay. All right, anything else here? All right, now, verse 11. Thus shall ye eat it, with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. How many of y'all have ever seen them eat the Lord's Supper, and they're all kicked back and laid back? I have read commentaries in the past that commented on the fact that it had become a relaxed thing, that have couches that lay back on while they were eating the Lord's Supper. Wholly, completely against what this is teaching. And if I remember right, I don't remember who it was that said that, or I'd look it up and tell you, but they recommended that that's probably how the Lord and the disciples did it. And I'm going, don't think they got that right. Because I think he did it just like it said right here, okay? I believe they had their shoes on their feet, and the whole reason is, okay, they're fixing to leave, all right? Now, it hasn't fully described that up to this point, but it's fixing to. They're fixing to leave, okay? And when they leave, there ain't no waiting around. There ain't no time to be wasted. It's time to go. Let's go now. Okay, you got to go. And this happens, okay, they're going to sacrifice and eat the lamb. And the next morning, from what I understand, if Pharaoh woke up in the middle of the night, we'll get to that in a minute, probably right at daylight, if not before, they're being told to get out. Okay? And it was with haste that they were leaving. So you get that picture here. And this is to be a memorial service, okay? As we continue down through this, you're going to see where that God tells them, do this every year, period. Do not fail to do it. Now, they did fail to do it. We find different places in the scriptures where they failed to fulfill their responsibility. But this is to be a memorial or a commemorative type ceremony where they were looking back at the night that God brought them out of bondage. Okay? But I'm going to say there's a little more to this, because at this point, none of this has happened. Okay? When the instructions are being given, none of this has happened. This is something they're still looking forward to. All right? So not only in this do you get the picture of, the 2,000 years that they're supposed to continue this as a memorial to what happened when they came out of bondage, but you've got 4 or 5 days here, whatever it was. I don't know exactly what day that the Lord spake to Moses. Okay, I mean, there's some conjecture here, but we're pretty close to the time. But you've got that much time that they're looking forward to it. Okay, I think that is important. I think it will be important as we move on. All right. So he said, "Thus shall ye eat it, with your loins girded." In other words, your clothes on, your shoes on your feet, which, your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is Lord's Passover. In other words, you're sitting here eating, but at any moment you could stand up and walk out the door. Okay? He said, "For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord." So this is where he tells them part of why they're doing this. There is, and you will notice if you go back anytime and take a few minutes to study through the plagues, okay? Each plague, as it goes forward and it gets progressively worse, there is a progressive separation that is made between Egypt and Israel. The last plague leading up to this one was the darkness. Okay? And if y'all will remember, on all the land of Egypt, it was dark for 3 days, if I remember right. It was several days. Okay? But it was not dark in the land of Goshen. That's where Israel was. Okay, so God is continually starting to show them there's a separation. This is what's coming on you. This is my people that I'm taking care of. All right? So we see that as we're working down through here. And as we come to this one, we see it even more so. Okay? And you notice where that God says, "I will execute judgment on the gods of Egypt." In other words, he's going to show who is God and who is not God. There's a distinction being made here. These are my people. I have protected them. I've given them the means of protection. They are a separate and a distinct people. And I consider that to be of enormous importance when we're looking at this. Okay? Because I'm going to go ahead and throw this out here, and it may help you to look at this just a little differently. Usually, when you hear this spoken of, this Passover, it is spoken of in relationship to the blood being applied, and the idea is that the blood is applied to the heart. Okay? And I've heard a lot of people do a really good job. I've preached that. Do not have a problem with that. Okay? But I want to say this right here. Abraham already had a covenant with God. These are the descendants of Abraham. These are already God's people. Okay? And God is visiting them, and he's bringing them out of the bondage that they are in. The blood, when it is applied on the door, not on the person. That is a little different, isn't it? Now, I understand that the blood must be applied to the heart for the heart to be separated, cleansed, and brought into a right standing with God. I am not arguing that that's not the case. I understand that's the case. Okay? And I don't have a problem with this being a picture along those lines. But where was the blood applied? If it's talking about the heart, it sure seems to me that it would have been applied to the individual person. But it's not. It's the household that the blood is applied to, right? Just hold that in your thoughts as we go down through this, because it puts a little different twist on it. You asking a question, Tony? Okay. Well, you just looked at me and I thought, John's done got upset. He's
I'm just gonna put my coat on.
well, I'm done hurt his feelings something fierce now. So, I tell you what. Okay, so, verse 13, and the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. We're talking about the execution of the judgment of God. Okay? That's what he's just said he's going to do on the gods of Egypt and on Egypt in general. But the blood separates this group of people that are the people of God from the execution of God's judgment. Okay? Keep going with me. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and you shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread. Even the first day you shall put away leaven out of your houses, for whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. Now I want to touch on something right here. And I made the promise at conference the other night that I wasn't going to get into an argument about wine and grape juice and all that, and I'm not. So, but I do want to go to Matthew real quick, and I want to show a thought or two about this idea of leaven. Matthew 16. If I can get myself to turn to the right place. I may not be able to, the way I'm going. Matthew chapter 16, verse 11. Okay? Well, let me back up. Verse 8. Which when Jesus perceived, he said, well, I can't start there. Verse 6. Then Jesus said unto them, take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees. And they reasoned among themselves, it is because we have taken no bread. Which when Jesus perceived, he said unto them, O ye of little faith, why reason ye among yourselves, because ye have brought no bread? Do you not understand, neither remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000, and how many baskets you took up, neither the 7 loaves of the 4,000, and how many baskets you took up? How is it that ye do not understand that I spake it not to you concerning bread, that ye should beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees? Then understood they how that he bade them not to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Okay? A false doctrine, a sinful idea, or in general, the idea is sin. Okay? Leaven, when it gets into something, it works, it foments, it causes it to grow. It causes, if you're talking about dough, it literally pulls the dough apart. I mean, we don't think of it that way. All right? But if it's putting an air bubble, if I have a wad of dough right here and you put an air bubble in it, what happens? It comes out. It comes apart. Okay? So these things that we're talking about, whatever you want to apply it as, be it sin, be it the doctrine of the Pharisees, Sadducees, however you want to apply it, what it does, it takes that which should be a holy lump and it pulls it apart. Okay? And I can't help but just call that sin, in my opinion. All right? So I want to get that idea in there, and that idea of leaven is what we're talking about, and y'all will notice back in Exodus, let's go back over there, Exodus chapter 12. That's what he is warning them against. We were in verse 15, correct? 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread, even the first day you shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day until the seventh day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. So those individuals that partake of the sin are cut off in the eyes of God. And this is a separation. I'm going to put it that way. Okay? The idea in this whole idea of the Passover, in my opinion, is that God is making a distinction between His people and other people. They are being separated. Okay? And they are being put together in a holy lump with nothing that should come between them. Now, let's go on a step further. It says, verse 16, and in the first day there shall be an holy convocation. And the seventh day there shall be an holy convocation to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread. For in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall ye observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. Now, there's really two things that are going on. And I want to clarify this. There's the Passover. Okay, that's the paschal lamb that is sacrificed. They eat it. The next day is when the 7 days begins of unleavened bread. Okay? They're tied intimately together. You can't really separate them, but there is a little bit of a separation there, right? Yes?
Who cuts them off from Israel? And is that a physical cutting off or a spiritual cutting off?
God cuts them off because God is the one that's going to know that. If Israel knows that, then Israel should cut them off.
What, take them out of the camp?
God,
Yes. They would become unclean. Okay, and you find throughout the scriptures in the law, when they are unclean, they have to be separated for a space of time, and then can be brought back in once they're clean, ceremonially speaking.
So if Israel doesn't know that,
God still knows it.
God will freely purge His floor, what it
Yeah.
says in the 4th chapter of Matthew, which means God's going to take care of what ain't been taken care of.
Yeah. Yeah, and He will. He will. Now, it is a shame if Israel were to know that somebody were guilty of violating this and didn't cut them off. It would be a shame to Israel because they are directly going against the commandment of God. Okay? So, yeah. So, there's a whole lot in this Old Testament sometimes that we don't think about that really does apply a whole lot to us in the New Testament, by the way. But you shall observe it. Feast of Unleavened Bread. Brought the armies out. Ordinance forever. Okay, verse 18. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at even, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at even. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses. For whosoever eateth that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your habitations shall ye eat unleavened bread. Now, my take on that is that's pretty all-inclusive. Okay? Anything with leaven in it is a no. Even during the Passover feast that the modern Jewish people observe today, they will take anything with leaven out of their house Now, they may go find one of their Gentile friends and say, here, keep this box for me for 7 days, because they've got several $100s worth of stuff there. But they get it out, and they don't have any of that in there till afterwards, okay? And I mean, it's completely out of the house. So if they're still that particular about that, I think at this time, they were told to be that particular about it, so I think all the way down through there, they're that particular about it. I think you would find Christ and the disciples when they prepared, that would have, in my opinion, been one of the things they would have checked for. Is there leaven in this house? Because he said specifically, none. Don't have it in there, get it out. Okay? So, any question? I've not stopped and given y'all an opportunity to ask questions. Have y'all got questions so far? I just hadn't said enough to get y'all riled up, I guess. I don't know. So, verse 21, then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said unto them, draw out and take your lamb according to your families and kill the Passover. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the 2 side posts with the blood that is in the basin, and none of you shall go out at the door of his house until the morning. Okay? There is a place of safety inside of these houses that are protected by the blood. I kind of get a picture as I was reading that, if you think back about, well, of course we're dealing with Moses, but go back to Noah, who was safe. Those that was inside of the ark that was closed up. It was sealed. God did the closing, but he held it there and it was kept safe because of what God had done. And they were safe inside. These were safe inside. Okay? Yes.
So, if they went through the process that was laid out,
Mhm.
they had the blood on the lintel,
Yes.
but they had leaven in their house, would he have spared the house?
He would have spared the house because that was not the determining factor. The determining factor was that the blood was on the doorpost and lintel, in my opinion. In my opinion. That doesn't mean, though, that they wouldn't have been cut off. Okay? Because what we're talking about cutting them off is not necessarily their death, it is their separation. Mm-hmm. Okay? The lack of blood on the doorpost and the lintel means death to the firstborn. Whoever is firstborn, it could have been the father, it could have been the mother, it could have been one of the children, it would have been one of the children. If they had beast in the house, which would not have been an unheard of thing at that time, and it was a firstborn, it would have died. Okay? So, I mean, that's what we're looking at. But that distinction is made by the blood. Now we're talking about a separation, though. A ceremonial separation from the rest of everyone else and being lumped together as a mass. Because he continues to go back to the bread. And so to me, that's a good picture. Okay? Again, you've got that lump, but if you put leaven in it, and y'all know about making bread, directly, if you put it in a nice warm place and it's allowed to grow, a favorable place. If it's allowed to grow, in about an hour it'll double in size. Okay? You get the same picture when things enter in. It grows, it pushes apart. That which should not be pushed apart, that which should be joined together. Okay? So you get that picture there. Okay? Other questions here? Okay. The hyssop, by the way, I did do a little research on that because I thought that'd be interesting. Really got no answer. It was some kind of an herb. There is a herb presently that is called hyssop, but almost everybody I read after said that's probably not what it was. I don't know. The hyssop that is presently out there is a member of the mint family, but a lot of them said it's probably something more like thyme or an herb like that. I don't know. That's what it boils down to. I don't know. I'm not sure they know, but long story short, it was probably some kind of an herb that grew up that you could take, and it would have had to have leaves on it, because otherwise it wouldn't have grabbed the blood and allowed it to be brought up. And one of the things that I thought was favorable of what we now call hyssop is that one of its attributes, it's used as a cleansing type of a oil, or you can make a tea out of it, I think, either one, and it has a purification type of attribute about it. It's one of the herbal remedy type things. To me, that would be a pretty good argument to say, yeah, that's probably what it is. But for some reason, there's a ton of people that said, no, that ain't what it is. So I really don't know. I didn't spend hours looking into it, but that might be something for y'all to look into sometime, okay? Because hyssop is used multiple times in the scriptures, okay? And almost always it is used in connection with the spreading of blood, the dipping in the blood, and the sprinkling the blood on the testimony later on at Sinai and on the people. You know, I mean, you get that same picture constantly, okay? You should take the hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, which I told you I was going to find in a minute, which is simply a bowl that is used to catch the blood when the animal was slain, okay? And strike the lintel and the two side posts with the blood that is in the basin, and none of you shall go out at the door of his house until the morning. So it is my understanding that if they walk out that door until morning, okay, they're going to die. Because it's the death angel. You're not going to hide from that. You're not going to get away from it, okay? For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and on the two side posts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your houses and to smite you. And you shall observe this thing for an ordinance to thee and to thy sons forever. And it shall come to pass, when you be come to the land which the Lord will give you, according as he hath promised, that ye shall keep this service. And it shall come to pass, when your children shall say unto you, what mean ye by this service? That ye shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses. And the people bowed the head and worshipped. And the children of Israel went away and did as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so did they. So, that's reading down through 28, okay? And these are all the instructions leading up to it, okay? Have y'all got questions or comments?
I think this separation is demonstrated in the New Testament in Acts chapter 2, where it says, repent, be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ, for remission of sins, and for the promises unto you and to those that are near and those that are far off. And I'm paraphrasing, but it says, save yourselves from this untoward generation.
Right.
Supposed to separate yourself from the world.
Right.
And that's the same picture.
Exactly. Exactly. I agree. I agree. Did all y'all get that? Because some of y'all are looking sort of like, what? What did he say?
The Lord was quite specific in his ordinances, however you want to call it. He was so specific in how it was to be done. I mean, everything about it. And somehow today, I just don't think as we see it that way. For whatever reasons, we just don't see the Lord and the way he done all this as very significant. It doesn't appear to me to be there.
I think, a lot of times we don't.
And I don't see why we don't.
And I know
Is he not real to us?
I don't know that it's always that. The first time after I was ordained, and a lot of y'all have heard me tell this before, first time after I was ordained as pastor at Hopewell, Lord's Supper came around. And I preached what I'd always heard preached at the Lord's Supper. Okay? Which is what you see a lot over in the latter part of the text in Corinthians. Okay? About judging yourselves. If we would judge ourselves, we wouldn't be judged. Many are dead, many sleep. Because of what? Because sin that's in our life. Which I do believe this all goes back to. And I'm not disagreeing with that. I believe that. And I was scared absolutely to death. I couldn't breathe for about a week leading up to it. And went through it, got through it. The Lord blessed me. I was thankful for it. And we got through it. We came back the next year, and it was coming up time for Lord's Supper. I went, it's Lord's Supper. I preach the same thing. I mean, that's what you preach on the Lord's Supper. That's all I'd ever heard preached on the Lord's Supper. And I went, that's what I'm going to preach. Okay? Well, I went in that Sunday, and I guess the argument could be made about my attitude not being where it should have been, which would probably be a correct assumption. But I don't think my attitude was all the problem. But I was just going to preach what I'd always heard. And, and I've heard preachers, good preachers, men that I have great confidence in. And when it comes to the Lord's Supper, that's all they've ever preached. And I'm not going to fall out with them. That's between them and the Lord. But I'm going to tell y'all, I like to choke that second year. And I had an awful time with it. And I finally got through it, and I didn't feel real good about it when I got done. I mean, it was rough. Okay? Now, when you're preaching, and some of y'all that are here that are preachers, y'all understand what I'm saying. There's times that you know good and well you hit it out of the park. And a lot of times when you hit it out the park, all you hear are the crickets. Mm-hmm. That's all right. There's other times that it's sort of, yeah, you did all right. It is all right. And you may get a few talks then. And then there's other times that you know good and well you fell flat on your face. That's when people are going to get up and tell you how good you did. But I was much closer to being on my face than I was coming out the park. I'll put it that way. Okay? It was rough. And I was hurt. And on the way home that day, with tears, I said, Lord, if you'll just help me, I won't make that mistake again. And leading up to it the next year, I got busy. And I started looking at it. And y'all know there's a whole lot more about this. A whole lot more about this than we normally hear. So to answer your question, Junior, it may not always be that we don't take God real, but we just may not know yet.
No.
And I have found myself personally in that position. Still find myself in that position. I'm sure there are multitudes of things that I need to know. And that's part of why we're, here. And specifically on this about the Lord's Supper. And I'm hoping some of those things that in that next year that I learned, that I will be able to share with y'all during this study. Okay? But there is more to this. Okay? There is more to this than the majority of us have ever heard. Okay? So, now I'm going to pause right there and I'm going to ask, are there any questions or comments now?
There's no substitute for delighting in the law of the Lord and meditating upon it day and night and day.
That's right.
There's no substitute. And the more you meditate upon it, the more you look at it, the more you study it, the more you just think upon it and ask the Lord to help you see it, the more He'll help you see it. And it's a growing process. And none, for myself, I don't get nowhere near as far as I need to, because I'm too busy worrying about the world, or just being absorbed with the world, instead of being absorbed with the things of God. God is a spirit, and he must be worshipped in spirit and in truth. He wants our whole heart all the time.
Always. Always. It's a hard work. No matter what we're dealing with, even if it is a physical action that God requires of us, it still has to proceed from the heart, or it ain't worth a plug nickel. So, anyway.
In verse 27 here in the 12th of Exodus,
Uh-huh.
maybe this is just translation or something, but I don't know why it's the wording is just standing out to me. The very last sentence there says, "And the people bowed the head and worshipped." I would read that, and I would skim over that, and I would say the people bowed their head and worshipped, but it says the head. Could that just be something in translation that?
It's an older English usage, would be my answer to that. That wouldn't be an unheard of phrase or way to turn a phrase in an
Bow
older
the knee.
English.
Yeah.
Do I?
Yeah.
Bow the knee.
The singular.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I've just not read that. That just for some reason was staring at my face.
But they dropped their heads and they worshiped God. They honored
Right.
Him. They glorified Him
Mm-hmm.
because He was going to do this.
Yep.
So,
I'm good friends with a couple of Jewish, now they're all Reform Jews, not Reform as in they're no longer Jewish, but the group that's
Yeah.
Reform Jews. But they take Seder very,
very
seriously.
seriously.
And they're the ones that are what we would consider the liberal Jews.
Yeah.
And it's serious.
Yeah.
And they follow it it's to a T, to the extent that if they're, and we don't have any here, but a true Jewish restaurant even, the restaurant clears everything out. Now they still have meals, but they clear all of their yeast, everything out. And their menu changes during the 7 days. And it is something they don't take lightly.
Right.
And if they go to a restaurant that's at a Gentile, and of course we don't have a big enough Jewish population here that we see this happening. But even their utensils, they'll bring their own utensils with them because they're afraid that it may have been washed with another fork that had touched leather. So they bring their own utensils with them to eat during this. It's much less if you get into the Orthodox and what all they do and how serious they take it.
If you go to the Hasidic or Orthodox Jews, then you're talking about man. It's
A whole different.
they're probably out there with the poor little old lamb, killing it themselves right then and bringing him in and
Right.
throwing him on the spit.
Right.
Literally.
But a group of people that in a lot of ways we consider them to be haphazard in their faith,
On this,
they
they're not.
take it very serious. And then
Yeah.
kind of back to what Junior, the whole group of us, not particular, take the Lord's Supper very haphazard.
Very haphazard. And very lightly.
And, God gave us specific instructions, and I know you'll get into it, but,
Yeah.
1 cup, 1 loaf, 1 this, it's very specific, and we are haphazard with it.
Yeah. I'm afraid too much so. So, all right.
Not just the Lord's Supper.
Huh?
Not just the Lord's Supper.
Right.
Well, no, but in as much as that's what we're looking at.
But you,
That's
going
a
back to
problem.
the killing of these sheep, I notice at my Mennonite friends, these people want to kill their own sheep. He'll offer to kill it for them, but no, they want to kill it themselves. And some of it ain't what, I'd say it's pretty wild stuff. But
Look here, it's a whole different ballgame
go up here to Mike's and get you a hunk of meat. Let's go out here in the backyard and take a little animal that you've raised up. One of them cows with them big brown eyes you look at and love so good. Yeah, that's a whole different ballgame.
And it's
To
like
take and kill it yourself.
Well,
that you nurtured.
Yes.
I may have told y'all about this, but I was over at Harvey's one day, on Saturday, and I walked up there and I was talking, I was gonna get a side of bacon, he cures bacon. I was gonna get a fresh side of bacon. And I heard somebody mumbling, what I call mumbling. And I got to looking through the cracks of the barn, and there's this guy sitting out there, Indian style, black from head to toe. And he had this little sheep up in his lap. And he was praying in this language I didn't understand. And this went on for 15 or 20 minutes. And he's got a pail of water, and he's giving water and putting it in that little sheep's mouth and just rubbing it. And I thought, what in the world is going on? The next thing I know, I'm watching him through the cracks. He's got my full attention. And the next thing I know, he takes an ice pick and sticks that little sheep right here. And he just laid over. Now, couple of things. He knew what he was doing. Someone had trained him, because if you don't know what you're doing, you ain't gonna stick that thing and it just. So he had been trained in that. And he did, once it died, he went off behind another building by himself and cleaned it all, and I told her, I gotta go.
Yeah.
I'm out of here.
Yeah. And I don't blame you. I'd have been on too.
But
Left
I
the
see all
bacon
kinds
there.
of wild stuff over there like that too. I don't know what they kind of people are, but they ain't bad. Now, you go over on Saturday, and I mean, there's not just one or two of them, every Mennonite house over there, the driveway's sitting full of them. In November is the month. November, around the 1st of December, in that area.
I'm assuming they're Muslims.
I'm assuming they are too. I'm assuming. I don't want to sell no sheep. Myself.
But there is a distinct difference.
Now, they're very
You
serious
do it
about what
yourself.
they're doing. I'm telling you, Muslim or whatever they are, they are very serious about what's going on.
If you want to get how serious the Jews are about this, just get on the internet, pull up an article about a kosher butcher. And the requirements that before they can be deemed kosher, I mean, there's all these requirements that they have to do, and how serious they are about keeping everything clean the way it's supposed to be. The animals have to have been killed a certain way, because the animal can't be scared when it dies. The whole thing is the animal's supposed to be calm and
As a sheep.
and
Dumb before his shears, so he went.
pointing towards Christ.
There's a reason for that.
Pointing towards
Yes.
Christ. But also, you know, today we know that a beef that's excited when it's killed, tastes different than a beef that wasn't excited when it's killed, because it's full of adrenaline.
Right.
Tougher too.
So I mean, there's reason for it, both spiritual and symbolically. It's there.
These people are, like you say, they're very serious to follow the letter of the law, but by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified.
Right.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Absolutely.
Wholeheartedly agree. But at the same time that
They're
we're
much
looking at
better at
this,
keeping it than we are.
Yeah. Yeah, the zeal of God is not according.
Absolutely.
There you go.
well, but you look at what Paul said. He said, concerning his former self, he said, touching the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. And that's a big statement. But that's the same man that said, I find the law now, talking under the new covenant, he said, I find the law present that when I would do good, then evil is present with me. Okay? But he said himself, about himself, touching the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. These things they were instructed and taught to keep from their youth up. And they did. I mean, they did. it was very serious to them. So when we're reading these things and we look at them, this is when God is very specific. There's a reason He's very specific. Okay, and when God specifies and says do it this way, there's a reason for that. Now I may not always be able to tell you what that reason is, but I've seen enough of those things that there is absolutely a purpose to it. Okay? So, someone else.
There was a time or two killing hogs and pop, late November, early December. I thought, well, I'll never be able to eat no more bacon. But I got over it.
You got over it.
Yeah. But something that come to my mind a while ago when you was talking about taking the Lord's Supper, reverence it like we should. I can distinctly remember. We'd been studying it, I guess, Brother Jerry or somewhere online, Brother Chad's house or something. And it finally, I guess, got through to me, settled in on me. I still probably don't reverence it like I should. But I can distinctly remember when the preacher said, well, talking about the cup, I'm going to drink this with you again till I drink it with you in my kingdom, and I about to come out of my skin. It was that real to me that morning. Yeah. It was beautiful, and I mean, I should have shouted, I guess. I held it back, but boy, it was good. And I can still remember that so well. So it was so real to me. I wish I'd let go, I guess, of whatever I had, but I was able to hold it, I suppose. But it was real that morning. It was beautiful.
Those two covenants are, they're both rich. But the new covenant is a forgiving covenant. Passover was, it represented them leaving.
Yeah.
But at the same hand, there was a darkness with Passover. Because, I mean, when you think about the cry that morning that came out of Egypt, I mean, we just can't even imagine the cry that came out. There's a darkness of it. And you can say, well, the Lord's Supper is the same way because Christ gave us life, but that's not the reason. That's not the point. The point on the Lord's, and I know I'm jumping.
No, go ahead.
But is that contract that we had with Him that I'm coming back.
Yeah.
So the new covenant in all aspects is so much brighter and blissful than what the Jews had.
Yeah. Yeah. No disagreement.
So the Jewish, they trained their children in this way. Every year they do this. How many of us at home, when we were younger, before the Lord's Supper, were we instructed, or did we instruct our own kids in our ordinances? I know it was preached, from the pulpit, but did we or do we? And I'm going to say myself, no.
We didn't like we should have, probably.
But I mean, like, I don't remember telling my kids about specifically the Lord's Supper right before we took it, other than we take it. I mean.
Well, not a cop-out by any means, but the difference between the Lord's Supper and the Seder or the Passover, they didn't just observe it going into church and here you go.
Yeah.
It was for 2 weeks. This is your life. I mean, everything about your life has changed. So, I mean, you didn't have an option but to explain it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and even today, like you were talking about some of your friends, Reformed Jews, there is an actual text the night that they celebrate Passover. There is an actual text.
Yes.
And it is scripted, just like you're reading a play. The daddy says this, And there is a place in there where the youngest child that's present in the house that has 4 specific questions that they're supposed to ask about this. Why are we doing this? What does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? Or,
Yeah.
I don't know what the exact questions are. Okay? But that's, it's almost like what we would think of as a catechism, if y'all are familiar with that, where it's, why do we do this? Here's the answer. Why do we do this? Here's the answer. It's the same type of a method of teaching. And that's they still use those. I did a little bit of research about that today. That's still something that's there. They use it. And I think that has developed over the years. Now, you also have to remember that the chances are probably pretty good that when you're taking the Passover, there's not a priest present unless you happen to be a Levite. So there's 11 others of all of Israel that aren't going to have a priest present. It's the Father, and they're the ones that are doing it. And I think there's something good about that. Most of our covenants speak to us about how we're supposed to have secret and family devotions. Don't know how often that gets done. Honestly, we have the expectation that we're going to go to church, the preacher's going to preach, we'll take them to Sunday school some, and that's how they're going to learn. Well, and those are good things, both of which I think should be done. But maybe there ought to be a little more about it at home. And these children growing up, they're there. Okay, they see that lamb over there by itself for 4 days, and they're going, "What's going on here?" And then they're probably present when it's killed, and then they're probably present at its cooking, and then they have to eat it, and then they have to ask the questions, and they have to be involved in that. And keep in mind, this is not a spiritual thing; it's a natural thing, but it's still. It wouldn't hurt us to be a little more careful about the instruction we give our children. Overall.
Brother Will, I was in and out of his house for several years, just through church, etc. And it was rare that I was in Brother Woodall's house, whether it was just me or a couple of people there, that you didn't have prayer before you left, and he didn't give you some instruction before you left. And older people used to, my grandmother did that with us. You would know, even if she was cooking dinner, she'd call us in and we'd have prayer. Yeah. And that's, I'm afraid, what we're lacking.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you remember people doing it. But we don't tend to think that way anymore.
Well, I think we've got so caught up. This is getting away from, but I think, and it's not a justification, but we're so caught up with everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now, I wasn't instructed in the Lord's Supper, when I was younger, before it was available to me and I could take.
I've just told y'all, I was an ordained preacher. Mm-hmm. And I was going, this is what you do.
It wasn't what you're supposed to do.
Well, I'm not going to say it was wrong. I'm just going to say I needed to do something more about it.
I'm with you.
And there was a little bit more in there. And the Lord got hold to me now. I remember first time I served the Lord's Supper at Union. I preached a couple of weeks on it. And the day of the Lord's Supper, I preached, and I can tell you generally what I preached, but I'm not going to get into it. We'll get into it later on in the study. But when I got done, went back out, helped Brother Carol Ramsey back into the truck with me to take him back to the nursing home. He
got up in there and he looked at me, he said, when did you figure that out? I said, well, here's the deal, preacher. Yeah, told him, he said, all right. And I thought, this is all he's going to say? And I said, well, do you believe it? And he said, yeah. I said, okay. I feel better now. But I mean, he sure, I was getting a little nervous there for a second. I thought maybe I went crazy here. I don't know.
I thought he fixed to say it the other way.
He might have just had to say it the way I got it figured out. I'm going to just tell you, there are some things that you believe. There's some things you know. Okay? And not everything that we hold to can I say, I know. Okay? I know about salvation. I know that the Lord led me to unite with His church. And there's some things about this, man, you're going to have a tall order to knock me off of them. Because I'm just there. I'm just there. So, anything else before I read a little bit more? I do want to read a few more verses. Okay. Verse 29 is where we got to. It says, and it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne, unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. You think about that. I mean, we're talking about the whole country. I mean, that would be overwhelming. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night, and said, rise up and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as ye have said. Also take your flocks and your herds, as ye have said, and be gone, and bless me also. Y'all notice here now, there's a change, okay? Things started getting, when they started out with the plagues, Pharaoh was like, yeah, I got some magicians over here, they can do that too. And then he started getting a little more serious, and there's things the magicians couldn't do. And then it got a little more serious, and he said, well your men can go, but let your wives and your little ones stay here. And then he said, well, you and your wives and your little ones can go, but leave your cattle here. Okay? Now we've got down to this point. He says, rise and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as ye have said. And take your flocks and your herds as ye have said, and be gone. Now he's done. He's done. He's got broke right here.
Yeah.
Right here. Okay? Now, no, I'm not going to say that. And bless me also. Okay? And the Egyptians were urging upon the people that they might send them out of the land in haste. So it wasn't just Pharaoh. Okay? The rest of the people, they're broke. Okay? That they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, we be all dead men. In other words, their expectation was they're next. And I would say, had this not happened, they would have been next. God's going to take them out of there one way or the other. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs being bound up in their clothes upon their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they parted the Egyptians, jewels of silver, jewels of gold, and raiment. That's the wealth of Egypt, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And the Lord gave the people favor. And let me say this. God did not give them the wealth of Egypt for them to have a whole bunch of stuff for themselves. Okay? Less than a year from now, we're going to be out in the desert at the bottom of Sinai, and there's a tabernacle that needs to be built. Mm-hmm. And where did the materials come from? Mm-hmm. Right here. Okay? God's already got a plan, by the way. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians. Okay? So I'm going to stop right there. That's verse 36. But you see this picture coming down through here. Okay? And again, I want y'all to keep in mind
this simple idea. God has just separated his people from Egypt, which is, you'll find elsewhere in the scripture, a picture of the world. It is a picture of sinful people, ungodly people. You find that throughout the scriptures when you really look at them. Okay? God just separated his people from them. Already a people. Now he renews the covenant. Okay? He renews the covenant at Sinai and establishes a covenant with that group of people. But they are already a people that are under covenant relationship with God. God made that covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And these are the descendants. Jacob became known as Israel, and Israel is the father of the 12 tribes that have grown into this great multitude of people.
Started with 75 people in Egypt, 75 people.
Yeah. And if you break this down, and we did this in Sunday school a few years back at Drake's Creek as we was going through it, and you start adding up the numbers, you can't get an accurate number of people, okay? Because all that are numbered are the men, okay? And that's going to be 18, 19 years old and upward. So the children also have to be added to that, and the wives have to be added to that. So if you just give one wife for every number you've got there and double it, and then just figure that every household has 2 children, and y'all know they had a whole lot more than that. Okay? I just told you the 12 tribes. Okay? There's a dozen that one man had, and these are people that have been down there. You look at Moses' family, there was 3 children there. Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Okay? So 2 is probably not an accurate. But if you just go to 2, okay, you're well up into the millions of people.
There's a couple of million plus women and children.
Yeah.
That's the way
You're well up into the millions of people.
that started with 75 and 400 years later. And then none of this was done by the power of Israel. This was done by the power of God.
Exactly. So, you know, I mean, we're talking about something pretty miraculous. You know, I mean, when we all watch, you know, the old 10 Commandments movie, we see that group of people, you think, man, that's a bunch of people, but it might be, you know, a couple thousand. that ain't even the children out of one tribe. That ain't even close. There's the multitudes of people that we're talking about. And I believe, if memory serves me right, when we figured it, you're looking at a population coming out of there that would probably be roughly equivalent to what's in the state of Tennessee right now. And they all got
in the
together.
wilderness, and there were lands that didn't want them to come through because they would consume the land.
And they all got together, and it's all heading in the same direction, because there's, you know, there was something that they could follow, a cloud by day and a fire by night. But when they got to where they was, now you think about all of the state of Tennessee getting together, and you wonder, well, why did it take them so long to get from here to here? That ain't that far. Okay? We got to get up in the morning. We got to tear everything down. We got to get it all lined up. We've got to take the tabernacle apart. The tabernacle has to move first. Then we follow. And then we get to the place where the cloud stands still. Well, guess what? Then the tabernacle gets set back up. And then each person has its own location that they've got to go. In their tribe has a location, but I'm persuaded that inside of the tribes, the families had locations, and inside of the families, the individual little families had a location.
God devised all
had to go all over
this
that
logistics.
place.
All this logistics
Yeah.
was God's plan.
Yeah.
And he devised it perfectly.
Ringling Brothers had nothing on it.
Not even
even close.
We couldn't even touch it.
Well, and I say that because
Our armies couldn't touch it.
if you study logistics, they say that the greatest logistical procedure in the United States had always been Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey.
Yeah.
they could get down and move quicker than the U.S. Army, anything else. But they had nothing on what these people were doing.
Yeah. I mean, because, again, I was guilty of this. I just couldn't conceive in my mind the numbers that we're talking about. You sit down and start adding them up. Okay? And all you're going to get, remember this, is the men. So the best, the number you get is about a fourth. On the low end, about a fourth. That starts getting pretty big, doesn't it? You know? When you start talking about this tribe and they had 350,000 in that tribe, well, you got 12 tribes. Okay? So then start adding them all up, and then all of a sudden you put all that together.
Did they have that many people before they went into bondage, or did they multiply things?
75 people.
75 people.
Went in,
Is what went down.
Egyptian bondage.
Yeah.
Oh,
That
okay.
was Jacob's.
Jacob's children. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. The descendants of Jacob and Rachel and Leah. And that was it. And one of them was already down there.
Yeah.
So, but anyway. All right, any other questions tonight? All right, next week, we will finish up some thoughts on the Passover and maybe get into a little more speculative, I guess you'd say. There's actually some more I meant to read here, but no, I didn't. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did. Y'all can read it. Y'all got the paper. He gets on down into this when we get down around, I think I stopped around where, 36? Okay, so when you start getting to 37, okay, 600,000 on foot that were men besides children. Not counting the wives. And I don't know how many children they had. Okay, so 4 times 6 is about 2.4 million, right? You're one of the big math teachers, CJ, is that right? Sounds good. Okay, all right.
Word, no.
That's if they only had 2 children on average. And that's very unlikely that the average children was 2. It was probably closer to 4 or 5.
Well, didn't some have multiple wives?
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. Very, very conservative
It
number.
just starts getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
very conservative number at one wife.
I mean, so you're talking several million, possibly even up towards tens of millions, or 10 million. So, anyway, all right. So, but if y'all want to read the rest of this, there are some things that we probably will want to get into next week when we get down, especially around verse 43, and the strangers are not to eat thereof. If they want to eat and they're not, they need to be circumcised. Don't break the bones. There's several little points in some of this when you get around verse 43. But we'll stop at 36, 37. Okay? And pick up on that next week. And then we've got a few others in the Old Testament I want us to look at. So, all right. Any questions?
Really great.
Yes.
Verse 30, when Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, you reckon he had children of Israel as servants? Like his servants wouldn't have been other Egyptians, possibly. I wouldn't think, right? Or would they be?
They could have been.
Could be.
I guess in the perfect sense of the word, every other Egyptian was his servant,
That's true.
in some sense.
Yeah.
Now, were they servile? Were they there, preparing food for him? Probably not, but I don't know that, because they were about as particular as the Jewish people became about cleanliness, and not for the same reasons, but but other nations and other peoples.
Yeah.
So it's possible that they were not preparing food.
Right.
Okay?
Israel was, they were herdsmen, and that was an abomination to the.
Yeah, to the Egyptians. Yeah, I mean, you just, and that's why they were down in the land of Goshen. Okay?
Yeah.
So, and the Lord passed through at midnight, which would have been the beginning of the next day. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, and he sent for Moses and Aaron. But now, keep in mind, Moses, he called for them by night. But now, they weren't supposed to come out till morning, and he had to send all the way from wherever he was at, which is probably Ramses, down to the land of Goshen to get them and get them up there. So we've got some time there. Okay.
It wouldn't have been the beginning of the day, though.
Well, really, the beginning of the day is
Would have been
6.
sunset.
Yeah. Sun up. Yeah. That's really not a law yet, but yeah.
But I assume they were
in our mind.
Yeah, but I'm assuming they were still thinking.
I would think so, because the evening and the morning were the first day.
Yeah.
That's all the way back in Genesis, and there's no reason to think they weren't. So,
Right.
okay. All right. Anything else here?
Pharaoh was not the first one.
Evidently not, because he walked out. He walked out. Now, who was before him? I mean, I don't know. There's some questions that arise right there. But you also realize that what's happened here is his firstborn, who should be the next Pharaoh, has just died.
Yeah.
So, possibly his wife has just died. I don't know, but I mean, it doesn't say. But if she was the firstborn,
I was going to ask that because that's a question that I've read and looked at. Is it firstborn males,
well,
or is it just firstborn? Now the argument is the Hebrew for firstborn has been added to it,
Yeah.
but the King James Bible never differentiates whether it's firstborn male or not.
I mean, I'm going to go back to verse 29. The Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. Now, there could be an argument made to excuse the women if you will make the firstborn be only a matter of inheritance. But that doesn't seem to be likely because it extended even to the cattle. Okay? Cattle have no inheritance, so that sort of falls by the wayside. So in my mind, and I can be proven wrong, but in my mind, what I see when I read firstborn, it's all. If it was us today, Callie just died. Okay? I mean, that's what it boils down to.
Would be a second child.
Sitting here grinning, but bitch, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
But I mean, y'all get the picture, right? I mean, to me, it's the firstborn. I don't see where it's gender specific.
I mean, I've read it both ways, and I've never had an answer.
Yeah, and like I said, all I know is it doesn't say. In the absence of it saying one or the other, I'm going to assume the greater, because again, the Lord's bringing them out, and this is what it's going to take. So, okay. Any other questions? All right. Let's stand together. Lord willing, we'll pick it back up next week. Doc, would you dismiss us tonight?
My Father, once again, I can thank you for the privilege of Father studying that word. We ask, Father, that you bless this little group, oh Father. May there be a Father, a light unto the community and the people that are around, oh Father, that they might show them the way that they should go. We ask, Father, that you bless each one that's gathered here, bless each one on their households, oh Father. Keep us healthy, oh Father, the might, oh Father, congregate here at the next appointed time.